This is the story of how an 18-year-old girl created one of literature's most enduring monsters, born from a combination of personal tragedy, forbidden love, and the terrifying scientific experiments of her era. For over 2 centuries, Frankenstein has gripped our imaginations, but the true origin of this tale is darker and more complex than most people realize. Welcome back. To understand how Frankenstein came to be, we need to start with the extraordinary world Mary Shelley was born into. On August 30th, 1797, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin entered the world in London, and her parents were two of the most radical thinkers of their time. Their influence would shape everything she would become, though tragedy would mark her life from the very beginning. Mary Wollstonecraft, her mother, had published A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792, a work that boldly argued for women's education and equality when women were largely confined to domestic life. She didn't just suggest minor improvements. She demanded that women be recognized as rational beings capable of the same intellectual pursuits as men, and her ideas were nothing short of revolutionary. William Godwin, Mary's father, matched his wife's radicalism with his own brand of revolutionary thought. His 1793 work, Inquiry Concerning Political Justice, advocated for anarchist philosophy and individual freedom, opposing institutional authority and arguing that reason and personal responsibility, rather than control from governments or monarchies, should guide people's lives. Together, Wollstonecraft and Godwin represented the cutting edge of progressive thought, holding unconventional views even on marriage itself, which they saw as a form of legal bondage. Despite these beliefs, they married in March 1797 when Wollstonecraft became pregnant with Mary, and that's when the darkness began. September 10th, 1797, just 11 days after giving birth to Mary, Wollstonecraft died from complications related to the delivery. Mary would grow up never knowing the mother whose radical ideas would influence her so deeply, and this loss became the first of many that would haunt her entire life. As a teenager, Mary visited her mother's grave at St. Pancras Old Church churchyard, sitting for hours among the tombstones while she read and wrote. The quiet stillness of death surrounded her during these moments, and they shaped the themes that would later emerge in her work. Much like Victor Frankenstein, who becomes obsessed with conquering death, Mary seemed haunted by the boundary between the living and the dead. Everything changed when Mary met Percy Shelley at just 16 years old. Percy, already an accomplished poet, had come to visit the Godwin household around 1812 or 1813, drawn by his admiration for her father's philosophical work, and their connection was immediate and intense. Long philosophical debates between Percy and William Godwin would stretch deep into the night, and Mary would listen, absorbing their fervent discussions about revolution, freedom, and human potential. Their bond quickly grew into something far more dangerous, and by 1814, when Mary was just 16, their relationship had become romantic. One problem stood in their way. Percy was already married to Harriet Westbrook, whom he had wed in 1811. William Godwin's reaction was swift and harsh when it came to his own daughter's affair, despite all his radical views on freedom and the constraints of marriage. His progressive ideas, it seemed, had limits when his daughter's reputation was on the line, but Mary and Percy made a decision that would change both their lives forever. July 28, 1814, marked the day they eloped to continental Europe, accompanied by Mary's stepsister, Claire Clairmont. Society cast them out, rejecting and judging them for their choices, and this sense of isolation and alienation would echo powerfully in Mary's later work. Just 7 months after their elopement, Mary gave birth to a premature baby girl on February 22, 1815. But the joy was devastatingly brief. March 6th came, only 12 or 13 days later, and Mary discovered that her child had died, and the dream she recorded in her journal that month would haunt her forever. She dreamt that her little baby came to life again, that it had only been cold, and that they rubbed it before the fire, and it lived. Then she awoke and found no baby, and this heartbreaking dream of reviving her lost child left an indelible mark on Mary's psyche. But the tragedy didn't end there. December 1816 brought another death when Percy's first wife, Harriet, was found drowned in the Serpentine River in Hyde Park, her body discovered on December 10th. Mary's exact feelings were never fully documented, though she likely experienced a complicated mix of sorrow and guilt, given the role her relationship with Percy had played in Harriet's despair. Mary and Percy married on December 30th, 1816, just weeks after Harriet's death, but the pattern of loss would continue relentlessly. Of the 4 children Mary would bear, only one, Percy Florence Shelley, born in 1822, would survive to adulthood, and William died in 1819 at age 3, while Clara died in 1818 at just 1 year old. While Mary grappled with these personal tragedies, the world around her was experiencing something equally dark and unnatural. 1816 became known as the year without a summer, and the cause was catastrophic. Mount Tambora in the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, had exploded between April 10th and 15th of 1815, and the volcanic ash cast into the atmosphere created a cloud that spread across the northern hemisphere. Average global temperatures dropped by nearly 1 degree. The skies turned dark and stormy, the air unnaturally cold, crops failed, people starved, and it was as if nature itself had turned hostile. During this eerie summer in June of 1816, Mary and Percy Shelley, along with Mary's stepsister, Claire Claremont, joined their friend, Lord Byron, at the Villa Diodati, a grand house overlooking Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Mary was 18 years old, and what happened in that villa would change literature forever. Lord Byron was already famous and infamous, having fled England amid scandals involving accusations of incest and various other debaucheries. His reputation followed him to Switzerland, where curious locals would try to spy on the villa, hoping to catch glimpses of whatever illicit activities they imagined were taking place inside, and joining them was John William Polidori, Byron's personal physician. The group represented some of the brightest literary minds of their generation, gathered together in this isolated villa while storms raged outside. Mary later recalled an almost perpetual rain, punctuated by tremendous thunderstorms, and the gloom was relentless, keeping them confined indoors night after night. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Byron proposed a challenge. Each guest should write a ghost story. Mary struggled with the assignment, and as she later described in the introduction to the 1831 edition of Frankenstein, she busied herself to think of a story that would speak to the mysterious fears of human nature and awaken thrilling horror. One to make the reader dread to look around, to curdle the blood and quicken the beatings of the heart. Each morning, she was asked if she had thought of a story, and each morning she was forced to reply with a mortifying negative. But before she found her answer, another element was at play that would prove essential to her inspiration. Conversations at the Villa Diodati weren't just idle ghost stories. They discussed serious philosophical and scientific questions, particularly the nature of life itself. This was the era of the vitalism debate, the question of whether life could be artificially created or if there was some inherent vital force, some spark, that science could never replicate, and it was a question that obsessed the intellectuals of Mary's time. Real science was fueling these philosophical debates, and Luigi Galvani, an Italian physician who lived from 1737 to 1798, had made a startling discovery in the 1780s. Applying electrical current could cause the muscles of dead frogs' legs to twitch and contract, as if they were alive, and he published his findings in 1791, creating the phenomenon known as galvanism. Giovanni Aldini, Galvani's nephew, took these experiments even further and more disturbingly. Public demonstrations of galvanism became his specialty, and his most infamous experiment occurred on January 17, 1803, at Newgate Prison in London, when he applied electricity to the corpse of an executed murderer named George Foster. Witnesses reported that the dead man's jaw quivered, His eye opened and his limbs moved, and the spectacle both fascinated and horrified the public. Medical schools faced a growing crisis at the same time, needing bodies for anatomical study but having access only to the corpses of executed murderers, and the supply couldn't meet the demand. This scarcity gave rise to an underground trade where resurrectionists, body snatchers, would steal corpses from graves and sell them to medical schools. The idea of exhumed bodies being reassembled and potentially reanimated tapped into profound fears about death and the sanctity of the human body, and the Anatomy Act wouldn't be passed until 1832, well after Frankenstein was published. Body snatching was widespread in Mary's time, and the public was deeply disturbed by it, which meant these scientific developments and questions about the nature of life and death were part of the conversations at the Villa Diodati, and that's when Mary had the vision that would change everything. She later described it in vivid detail. She saw, in her mind's eye, a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the lifeless body he had pieced together. The corpse, grotesque and hideous, began to stir, powered by some mysterious engine and moving with an unsettling, half-animated motion. And the student, horrified by what he had done, went to sleep, hoping it was all a terrible dream. But he awakened to find the horrid thing standing at his bedside, opening his curtains, and looking at him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. Mary opened her own eyes in terror, but she had found her story, and she began writing what would become Frankenstein. The novel wasn't created in isolation. Mary was drawing on powerful literary influences that had long captured her imagination. The novel's original subtitle tells us this directly: Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, which is a direct reference to the Greek myth of Prometheus, the titan who defied the gods by stealing fire, representing knowledge and power, and giving it to mankind. Prometheus was condemned to eternal torment for this act of rebellion, bound to a rock where an eagle would devour his regenerating liver each day. Victor Frankenstein defies the natural order in the same way by attempting to create life, and like Prometheus, he suffers devastating consequences for his ambition, facing torment for pushing beyond the limits of what humans should attempt. John Milton's Paradise Lost, the epic poem from 1667 that tells the biblical story of Satan's rebellion and the fall of man, was another major influence. Satan, cast into hell after rebelling against God, escapes to the Garden of Eden to corrupt mankind, tempting Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge and leading to Adam's fall and their expulsion from paradise. Milton's Satan is portrayed as a tragic figure, and in Frankenstein, the creature explicitly reads, "Paradise lost," comparing himself to both Adam, the created being, and Satan, the fallen angel rejected by his creator. As the creature tells Victor, "I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king if thou wilt also perform thy part, the which thou owest me." And the novel explores these themes of creation, rebellion, and the responsibilities that come with bringing new life into the world. And then there's the name itself, Frankenstein. What many people don't realize is that Frankenstein Castle is a real place, built around 1250 in the Odenwald Mountains near Darmstadt, Germany, and the castle is surrounded by legends and folklore. One of the most intriguing legends involves Johann Conrad Dippel, born at Frankenstein Castle on August 10th, 1673. An alchemist, physician, and theologian, Dippel created something called Dippel's oil, an animal oil produced through destructive distillation. And legend has it that he conducted experiments on corpses and sought to create an elixir of life, though modern historians debate whether these stories are factual or later embellishments. In 1814, before writing Frankenstein, Mary journeyed along the Rhine River and spent time in the town of Gernsheim, approximately 10 miles from Frankenstein Castle. She may have heard whispers of Dippel's dark legacy, but there's no mention of it in her journals, and we can't confirm whether she knew these stories, though the name Frankenstein, which literally means stone of the Franks in German, was certainly drawn from this real and eerie location. Mary completed her manuscript, and January 1st, 1818 marked the publication of Frankenstein by Lackington, Hughes, Harding, Maver, and Jones in London. The first edition consisted of 3 volumes with a print run of just 500 copies, but here's the remarkable thing. Mary's name wasn't on it. The novel was published anonymously because that was the reality for women writers at the time. Publishing under their own names was nearly impossible. Percy Shelley had written the preface to the novel, which made matters more confusing, and many readers and critics assumed that Percy was the author. William Godwin received the dedication, Mary's father, but that dedication didn't reveal Mary as the writer either, and for 5 years, the true genius behind Frankenstein remained hidden. The second edition, published in August 1823, finally changed that when Mary's name appeared on the title page, by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. And only then did the world know that an 18-year-old girl had created one of literature's most enduring works. Critical reception was mixed. Some praised the novel's originality and imagination, while others condemned it as disgusting absurdity or morally dangerous. Sir Walter Scott, the famous writer, reviewed it positively in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine in 1818, but even he assumed Percy had written it, though the public was enthralled. Almost immediately, Frankenstein began to take on a life beyond the pages of Mary's novel. Just 5 years after the book's publication, on July 28, 1823, exactly 9 years to the day after Mary and Percy had eloped, the first stage adaptation opened at the English Opera House in London as Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein, written by Richard Brinsley Peake. Mary herself attended a performance, but the play took significant creative liberties with her work, and legal restrictions at the time meant that only the Royal Theatres of Drury Lane and Covent Garden could perform legitimate drama. All other theaters were limited to melodramas, pantomimes, and musical spectacles, which meant Presumption had to incorporate music, pantomime, and exaggerated theatrics to comply with these regulations. The adaptation introduced a character named Fritz, Victor Frankenstein's assistant, who didn't exist in the original novel, and this character would later evolve into the hunchbacked Igor. That's become a fixture of Frankenstein adaptations, though Igor himself never appeared in Mary's book. Portraying the creature as mute, unable to speak, was a stark contrast to the eloquent, self-aware being Mary had created, and the play concluded with a dramatic avalanche destroying Frankenstein's laboratory, adding spectacle to the story. This melodramatic, exaggerated style may have contributed to the slightly tongue-in-cheek perception of Frankenstein that endures to this day, and many later stage and film adaptations adopted this theatrical approach, moving further and further from Mary's original vision of a tragic tale about creation, responsibility, and the consequences of isolation. Even as her novel found success and began its journey into popular culture, Mary Shelley continued to endure profound personal tragedies. July 8, 1822, brought the death that would devastate her most completely when Percy Shelley drowned as his boat, the Don Juan, sank in a storm off the coast of Livorno, Italy. 29 years old when he died, Percy's body was found 10 days later on July 18th and was cremated on the beach. Mary was 24 years old and pregnant at the time, and she miscarried shortly after his death, but she continued writing after losing Percy. Several more novels emerged from her pen, including Valperga in 1823, The Last Man in 1826, a post-apocalyptic novel, and others throughout the 1830s, and she dedicated herself to editing and promoting Percy's works, ensuring his literary legacy would endure. Financial struggles followed her through these years because Percy's father, Sir Timothy Shelley, provided an allowance for Mary's son Percy Florence, but restricted his support otherwise, and Mary supplemented her income through writing, contributing biographical essays to lives of the most eminent literary and scientific men between 1835 and 1839. February the 1st, 1851, marked Mary Shelley's death in London at the age of 53, likely from a brain tumor, and she was buried at St. Peter's Church in Bournemouth, alongside the remains of her parents, which she had moved there. But Frankenstein lived on, and the novel's influence only grew with time. Edison Studios produced the first film adaptation in 1910, a 16-minute silent film, but the 1931 film Frankenstein, directed by James Whale and starring Boris Karloff as the creature, would cement the visual image most people associate with Frankenstein today. Karloff's portrayal established the iconic look, the flat-topped head, the neck bolts, the lumbering gait, and the creature's green skin, which seems so essential to the image, was actually the result of makeup that appeared better in black and white film. This version made the creature largely mute and sympathetic, far removed from the eloquent, philosophical being of Mary's novel. And this brings us to one of the most common misconceptions about Frankenstein: the name. Many people call the creature Frankenstein, but that's incorrect. Victor Frankenstein is the creator, the scientist, while the creature remains unnamed throughout Mary's novel. He's sometimes called Frankenstein's monster, or simply the creature, but never Frankenstein himself, and this confusion speaks to how deeply the story has penetrated popular culture, even as many of its most important elements have been lost or transformed. When you read Mary Shelley's novel today, particularly the 1818 version, which differs significantly from the revised 1831 edition, you find something far more complex than the melodramatic adaptations suggest. Victor Frankenstein is a young scientist consumed by ambition who works for nearly 2 years, depriving himself of rest and health, driven by a desire to infuse life into an inanimate body. But when he succeeds, when the creature opens its yellow, watery eyes, Victor is immediately horrified. As he says in the novel, "Now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart," and he abandons his creation. This abandonment is the original sin of the story because the creature isn't born evil. Intelligence and deep feeling characterize the creature from the beginning. He teaches himself to read, devouring books including Paradise, Lost, and he longs for connection, for acceptance, for love. But everywhere he goes, people react to his appearance with terror and violence, rejecting him over and over, not because of his actions, but because of how he looks. At one point, he finds temporary companionship with a blind man who, unable to see him, treats him with kindness. But when the man's family sees the creature, they react with fear and violence, driving him away. The creature eventually confronts Victor and makes a desperate plea, begging Victor to create a female companion for him, someone who won't reject him based on his appearance. "I am alone and miserable," he tells Victor. "Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me." And Victor, guilt-ridden and fearful, reluctantly agrees. But at the final moment, overcome with dread about what he's creating, he destroys the second creature before bringing her to life, and this is the turning point. The creature's sorrow transforms into a burning desire for vengeance, and like Satan in Paradise Lost, who seeks to destroy what he cannot have, the creature embarks on a quest to ruin Victor's life. William, Victor's younger brother, becomes the first victim. Then Victor's best friend falls, and on Victor's wedding night, the creature kills Victor's wife, Elizabeth. The creature inflicts on Victor the same isolation, the same devastating loss that Victor inflicted on him, and in the novel's conclusion, Victor becomes consumed by revenge, chasing the creature across Europe and eventually into the frozen Arctic wasteland. This barren, icy landscape becomes a symbol of their shared misery, with creator and creation locked in a tragic, endless pursuit of ruin and regret. It's a chilling reminder that invention without responsibility, creation without compassion, can spiral into destruction for everyone involved. And from a modern perspective, the themes of Frankenstein remain strikingly, relevant. Today, we grapple with ethical dilemmas posed by genetic engineering, CRISPR technology, artificial intelligence, and cloning, asking the same questions Mary Shelley asked in 1818. Just because we can do something, should we? What responsibilities do we have to our creations, and what happens when we push the boundaries of possibility without considering the consequences? Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is far more than a simple horror story about a scientist and his monster. It's a synthesis of her personal tragedies, from the death of her mother to the loss of her children and the drowning of her husband. Her complex relationships shaped it, particularly her forbidden love with Percy Shelley and the isolation they faced as social outcasts, and the scientific curiosity of her era influenced every page, when electricity seemed to hold the key to life itself, and when the line between life and death seemed tantalizingly crossable. Built on myths like Prometheus and literary works like Paradise Lost, the novel explores timeless questions about creation, rebellion, and responsibility. But perhaps most importantly, it's a cautionary tale about what happens when we abandon what we create. Victor's greatest crime isn't bringing the creature to life. It's rejecting him the moment he opens his eyes and refusing to take responsibility for what he's made. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein when she was just 18 years old, in the summer of 1816, surrounded by death and darkness. The creature she brought to life through her words has endured for over 2 centuries, evolving and changing with each generation, but never losing its power to make us question our own ambitions, our own responsibilities, and our own humanity. That's the disturbing origin of Frankenstein. Not just a ghost story born on a dark and stormy night, but a profound meditation on life, death, and the terrible consequences of playing God, written by a teenage girl who understood loss and isolation